Hi, friends. Welcome back to Rapture and Chill. I'm Brooke, and thank you so much for being here to wrap up season 1 with me. I hope everyone had a wonderful Father's Day weekend. We definitely did. But was this past week a lot, or was it just me? We're definitely manifesting more chill and less rapture this coming week. I've still been obsessively consuming World Cup content and watching matches too. Steve got me hooked, and this is the first year I've ever been really into it. Merlin the Duck is why the internet was invented. I'm not even accepting arguments about that. I love him. And oh, guys, did you see that one of the Turkish commentators covering the match between Iran and New Zealand had the teams mixed up for the first several minutes? That is so real, man. There are so many teams with multiple uniforms or kits in different colors. It's really hard to keep up, poor guy. Anyway, the background of my entire week was soccer, and I'm not mad about it. Well, soccer and reading up on today's subject. Okay, so way back in episode 1, I briefly talked about Enoch, and I've been wanting to dive deeper into why he was so important and why in the world he would have been almost completely excluded from the Bible. You'll see what I mean by the time we're done talking about this today. His story's straight up cool. Enoch's what I personally aspire to be. I want to ascend so much that I physically leave the planet. I mean, that's a reasonable goal, right? I think so. Anyway, here's episode 10, Enoch's Ascension, the original Rapture. Okay, guys, so before we even dive into Enoch's life, I have to correct something that I said in episode 1, and it actually makes this entire story even more interesting. So when I discussed Enoch before, I got two different Enochs mixed up. I said that Enoch was the son of Cain, and it's true, Cain did have a son named Enoch, but that is not the same person as Noah's great-grandpa. Everything else that I said was in reference to the correct person, but I got his dad wrong. So I'll touch more on that later because there's a weird synchronicity in there and I want to point it out. Now, our Enoch's dad was Jared. And the fact that my brother's name is also Jared is really just a coincidence. Or is it Adam, the OG Adam, was Enoch's 4 times great-grandfather. So great-great-great-great-grandfather. And because Adam lived for over 900 years, he was actually alive for a good chunk of Enoch's life. Unfortunately, there's not a lot that was written about Enoch's earliest years. He was only mentioned in Genesis once, and most people probably don't have the Book of Jubilees or the Book of Enoch in their Bibles. They're only canonical in Ethiopian Orthodox Bibles. Otherwise, both books are considered apocryphal. But Enoch's existence isn't a subject of dispute by any means. I mean, he was Noah's great-grandpa. And there are some bits of his earlier years found in Jubilees. There are writings about him spending time into his teenage years mastering skills that no other human had learned yet. He was allegedly the first person ever to learn letters, writing, and wisdom, so he created the system of writing down human speech. Once he'd accomplished that, he spent the next several decades studying science and astronomy. The texts say that he learned the signs of heaven according to their months and put together the world's first solar calendar so that people could accurately track the seasons. At some point in this early stage of his life, he had a terrifyingly vivid prophetic dream. He saw the entire span of humanity from creation to Judgment Day. He witnessed mankind becoming increasingly more violent and corrupt and slipping further away from their divine nature despite being made in God's image. That's spiritual amnesia again. So Enoch wrote out a formal testimony against the humans of his generation, confronting them about their actions and warning them about the coming flood. Jubilees specifically states that Enoch, quote, placed the testimony on earth for all the children of men and for their generations, end quote. That way they or we couldn't claim ignorance of the truth. He intended for those writings to survive the flood, and they did. More on that later too. Now, keep in mind, humans lived for hundreds of years at this point in time. So even though we're talking about Enoch entering his 60s, he was still young. The aging process was much slower. He and his wife Edna had their first son Methuselah when Enoch was 65 years old. This is where Enoch's story gets super cosmic. According to both 1st Enoch and Jubilees, after Methuselah was born, Enoch entered a centuries-long period of angelic education. Over the years, the angels took him on a series of interdimensional tours guided by Uriel, Raphael, and Michael. He wasn't physically leaving the planet, though. He was meditating and having out-of-body experiences. Enoch wrote about how he would be lying in his bed when a whirlwind of spirit would lift him up. His body was still physically in bed, but his mind and spirit were on a field trip. The angels showed him the portals of heaven where the stars and the wind were controlled. He also saw the depths of the earth where the spirits of the dead were waiting for Judgment Day. Then, he was taken to the most extreme outer edges of creation where the laws of physics as we know them don't apply. Places he described as being part of a chaotic wasteland with no sky and no ground. That common theme of the chaotic void we've seen across cultures is here too. There's really no exception to it. During his internship with the angels, they showed him the entire framework of reality. He wrote all of this down in journals which were compiled into what is now known as the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries, or the Astronomical Book. He was like a cosmic scientist, recording the mechanics of how the sun rises and sets, how the lunar cycle works, and the logistics of a solar year. He also got a close-up meteorology course when the angels took him into what the text calls the closed chambers. These chambers were like weather control rooms where natural phenomena was managed by angelic spirits. He learned that each element was measured and intentional, from rain and hail to thunder and lightning. Everything was managed within a highly organized, intelligent system. Enoch spent 300 years going on side quests with the angels, learning and absorbing all of that divine wisdom. But during that time, he was also at home with his family. He and Edna had more children after Methuselah, and he played an active role in raising his sons and daughters. He was very much a family man, but periodically he would slip into other dimensions with the angels. He became a bridge between the physical world and the higher realms. He was home watching his family grow older, but he also stayed tuned into that divine frequency. He completed his internship with the angels at 364 years old and was given very specific terms during his final astral meeting. The archangel Uriel told Enoch that he had exactly 1 year to teach his children the things he'd learned and write it all down for them. When he came out of that meditation, he sat down with Methuselah and gave him his entire collection of books, 366 journals that he had written during his interdimensional travels. He explained that the books were the key to surviving the coming flood, and he told Methuselah to study the books and pass them down for future generations, which is how the writings survived the flood later. During that final year, Enoch looked at the world through a totally different lens. He could see the destructive cycle that humanity had fallen into, and he did his best to explain to his family how the moral decline of society had thrown the physical frequency of the planet completely off balance. He described it like a cosmic feedback loop. Humanity became severely immoral. The natural system started to misfire. The rain would stop falling, crops would fail, the stars' orbits were literally altered. The energy that was being put out by the world was coming back in waves of negativity. He knew exactly what their trajectory was, and he was doing everything he could to make sure his family was warned and prepared. He spent 12 full months writing and teaching, and then his 365th birthday came. The man who had discovered the 365-day solar calendar lived on Earth for 365 years. Coincidence? According to Genesis, Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, for God took him. But the apocryphal texts give us the missing details. Enoch wrote that he was taken up in a whirlwind, and as he passed through the threshold into the highest realm of the heavens, God told the archangel Michael to strip Enoch of his dense earthly clothing, which would have been his body, not his literal clothes, and anoint him with celestial oil. Enoch looked down and realized that his body had been transformed into pure light. He didn't die, his body wasn't left behind, he just ascended so much that it set his spirit free of his physical form. And then God turned him into the most terrifyingly powerful archangel in the heavens, Metatron. I know, that sounds like a transformer, and honestly, now I'm kind of wondering if Megatron was somehow inspired by Enoch transforming into Metatron. Anyway, that's his name, I'm not making it up. According to the text, Enoch's physical form was completely dissolved, and he was rebuilt from scratch into a supreme celestial being, not greater than God, obviously, but still pretty major. The text describes Metatron as being large enough that his body covered the entire width and length of the world. He had 72 huge wings, and his body was covered in 365,000 eyes that glowed bright like little suns. His flesh was transformed into an eternal flame, his bones into burning embers, his eyelashes into flashes of lightning, his eyes into torches of fire, and the hairs on his head into hot flames. Seriously, I can't visualize that and it not sound horrifying. That should give you an idea, though, of how extremely powerful God made Enoch because of how faithful and pure he was in the missions he was given. He became the supreme chancellor of heaven, the recording scribe of the universe, and the governor over all the other angel princes. God gave him the title of the Lesser Yahweh, or the Little Lord, which is objectively hilarious. As you can imagine, though, the original angels weren't thrilled about this and asked God, "Why is one born of a woman allowed to rule over us?" But God denied their appeals and described Enoch as the choicest of all humanity. I don't think you understand how much this blew my mind. Enoch went from being a father and a husband to sitting on a throne as the supreme chancellor of heaven, second only to Yahweh. Remember, this is pre-Jesus, BC. Don't come for me. And now I'm going to rant for a minute. I haven't given you guys too many of these, but this warrants one because it honestly makes me angry that none of the meat of Enoch's story is included in the canon. Can you imagine how differently things might have been throughout history if this character had been included in the Bible? We're missing a very important narrative from our faith, in my opinion. Enoch existed in our Bible. He was part of a very faithful lineage from Adam to Noah. The book of Enoch is even quoted in Jude in the New Testament. So I think it's actually a very manipulative and calculated move that was made by a few men who wanted to make sure that the path of Christianity itself went in a very specific direction. It doesn't mean Christianity is wrong, but it does mean that we have a very incomplete view of the truth. And isn't that a shame? To deny us of such a striking example of what it looks like to become enlightened and ascend beyond this physical realm. The way I was taught, there's heaven and there's hell. You go to one or the other after you die. I've said before that I don't think that's necessarily true. I think heaven and hell are states of mind that are very much experienced during life. Whatever happens after we die, before we make it to Judgment Day, I don't know. Enoch does. He visited that place on one of his celestial trips. But this entire story feels like a missing puzzle piece to me. It explains so much and gives an entirely new perspective to enlightenment within Christianity. So it's annoying to me how people get a little power and decide to just create their own version of the truth. I don't care what the men at the Council of Chalcedon thought or what was decided at the Council of Laodicea. I want to know what the texts say. I'm perfectly capable of using discernment to decide what I believe or take literally, and so are you. But dismissing the legitimacy of such an important person's role that directly affected other major narratives like Noah and the flood feels both irresponsible and intentionally manipulative. So I'll be screaming about this for the foreseeable future. Now, to wrap up our episode about Enoch, I want to point out a few interesting things that I learned while I was researching his story. Earlier, I explained that I confused Cain's son Enoch for Jared's son. Obviously, it is not breaking news that Cain killed his brother Abel. We all know that. After he fled his family's farm, Cain and his wife had their first son, Enoch. Cain then built a city and named it after his son. And Cain's descendants are credited with different types of invention and innovation in the Bible. So Cain's lineage is traditionally associated with the more secular side of humanity. After Abel was killed and Cain left, Adam and Eve had another son, Seth. His lineage, which includes Jared, Enoch, and Noah, is a stark contrast to his brothers. They're much more spiritually in tune, and that would explain Enoch's ascension and Noah receiving the instructions for building the ark. Okay, so the reason this entire mix-up of the Enochs was so funny to me is that it reminded me of the narrative from Prophecy Rock. If you haven't watched episode 2 yet, you should. We talked about the Hopi legend of the two brothers who took different paths, the upper and lower, or spiritual and secular paths. One stayed to work the land and maintain a connection to the divine through nature. The other went west to study and invent. It's like in the Bible, we had the prophecy of two lineages instead of the two brothers. The Hopi believed that if the one returned from the west and recognized the brother, humanity would be okay. But if not, there would be a great purification. Well, it kind of feels like if the secular side of humanity now can recognize or get back in touch with the spiritual side, we'll be okay. Another thing I want to mention briefly is how Elijah plays into the whole plot. Elijah is the only other person in the Bible who was raptured without dying. And this was thousands of years after Enoch, so post-flood. Elijah had been fighting the corruption of the monarchy under King Ahab and the worship of Baal in Israel. He basically had a showdown on Mount Carmel with 450 prophets of Baal, and Elijah won. I won't go into the details, but because of the role he played and because he had a direct connection to nature and the elements, Elijah ascended without dying. Remember how in dharmic traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism, there are multiple paths to enlightenment? Well, aren't Elijah and Enoch both proof that there are multiple paths to ascension too? If Jesus or Christ is the one way, then Elijah and Enoch would be two distinct examples of how to follow different paths to that same destination or that same way, Christ consciousness. They were both being Christ-like in their individual roles before Jesus was ever born. So to me, it seems like God was trying to get his message out through different people, both before and after the flood, we know. When that didn't work, he sent a physical manifestation of his message, which was obviously Jesus. Jesus was the message of the Christ consciousness. He was the embodiment of it. It all makes so much more sense with Enoch's story included, and it doesn't take away from Jesus or his role as the Son of God. It doesn't mean that any certain belief system is wrong. I think the key is that there's truth in all of it, whether you're religious or not, Christian or Buddhist, anything or nothing at all. The underlying truth is in a divine connection. There's a path to it no matter where you are spiritually. Okay, guys, please tell me that Enoch's story blew your mind as much as it did mine. It adds another esoteric layer to everything that I thought I knew about Christianity. Intuition has been one of those common theme words that's come up for me this past week. Intuition and discernment go hand in hand, I think. As a kid who grew up learning a very specific interpretation of the scriptures, regardless of what my intuition told me, asking too many questions felt like doubting God or blasphemy or something. Looking back at that now, it's easy for me to see how I could have just rejected the whole idea since I didn't feel at liberty to really explore it objectively. It took me hitting my lowest point to realize that I absolutely am allowed to ask questions, any and all that I want. And what's ironic is that asking questions and going within myself for the answers has had the opposite effect. It reignited my faith in whatever God is. So I hope that over the course of this first season, you've become encouraged to go on your own journey of enlightenment. Ask questions, follow your intuition, and use your discernment. Whatever you do, I'm proud of you for being open-minded at least. I hope you breeze through your awakening and that you feel inspired to guide your friends through theirs. Thank you so much for spending this first season with me. Now go within and find your own way to rapture and chill. I love you. Bye!